Hello friends, you all are welcome to our Yojana series, and today we are going to study Yojana of May 2021. So in this Yojana May 2021 we are going to study 6 most important topics, and we will be seeing this Niti Aayog redefining federalism, then one nation one election, fiscal federalism in COVID-19 time. So this is one important. Then challenges of skill development, challenges in federalism and way forward, and of course a bit about human development index also, the progress in human development since independence. So now let us begin, and let us study this topic 1, Niti Aayog redefining federalism. So first let us see the differences between Planning Commission and Niti Aayog. Okay, we will try to understand this with the help of one example. Okay. So let us see one centrally sponsored scheme. For example, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. Now this Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, it is a centrally sponsored scheme and relates to education. Okay, relates to increasing the literacy rate of people, primary education, all these things. So let us see what happens. In case of this, the Planning Commission, it is now introducing this centrally sponsored scheme, the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. Okay, and it is asking the various states, S1, S2, S3, S4, various states, that you implement this Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and for this the ratio of fund will be 75:25. For example, it can be 90:10 or 60:40, whatever. But this 75 will be given by the center and this 25 will be given by the states. Okay. Now this Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan has to be implemented by all the states. Okay, and all the states has to necessarily give 25% of the fund. Okay, for this purpose, and this 75% that is being given by the center for Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan has to be used for that purpose only. So it is tied fund. Okay, it is tied fund. Now see what we can see from all this analysis, that it is centralized planning. Okay, the first thing is that it is centralized planning, it is top down, that means it is running from Planning Commission to the states. Okay, so it is top down, this is one thing. It is unilaterally designing pan India development. For pan India development, Planning Commission has planned that Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan will be there, and it is being implemented by all the states. Okay, so this is for pan India development. So one size fits all approach is there. Okay, that means same scheme is to be implemented by all the states. Okay, but this one size fits all has its problem. For example, this say this state 1 is Bihar. So in case of Bihar, the literacy rate is 63%, but in case of S2, that is Kerala, let us say Kerala, it is 96%. So what is the utility of this scheme for Kerala? Because Kerala has already achieved some good level of satisfactory level of this literacy rate. Okay, so one size fits all approach is not good in this case, but during Planning Commission era it was one size fits all. This is how top down we have discussed. Now see, if we see that there is this much tied fund, okay, so this fund cannot be diverted by the states for other purposes. For example, Kerala cannot divert this fund for other schemes or other sectors except the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and also states has to compulsorily give this 25% of fund for this purpose. So it is in fact affecting the fiscal sovereignty of the states. So this is how it is. And of course the Planning Commission, we know that it was the in fact Planning Commission through which the discretionary grants was given to the states. Discretionary grants was given to the states. So Planning Commission was the fund disperser. So this is how it is all about Planning Commission. Now let us see Niti Aayog. So in case of Niti Aayog is not fund disperser. Okay, it is not fund disperser. Rather it is working as thought partner. It is working with various stakeholders. It is forging meaningful partnership with the state, civil society, private sector, innovators, etc. For example, strategy for New India at the rate 75. So in that case, Niti Aayog has forged meaningful partnership and discussions with the various stakeholders. Then we can see that Niti Aayog is coming with various research papers. Okay, so this is how it is acting as thought partner with the various stakeholders. But it is not fund disburser as such. Now let us see these 3 points. These 3 points through again restructuring of CSS. So we can see that after this Niti Aayog, there was one subcommittee of chief ministers on this centrally sponsored schemes, and the centrally sponsored schemes was restructured. Now it is having 2 aspects. One is the core and optional, and within core there is core of the core, but we will not go into that much details. But there is core centrally sponsored schemes which are core, and centrally sponsored schemes which are optional. So optional are those which states may implement or may not implement. So it means that now it is not getting imposed on the states as in case of planning commission. Rather, the state's first approach is now getting reflected here. So this is one. Again, the concept of flexi fund. Flexi fund has been introduced. It means that now states can divert some part of the fund for other purposes. Okay, so this is now dilution of the concept of tied fund. So this concept has got diluted. So in fact, because of this optional CSS and the concept of this flexi fund, so we can see that how because of these 2 things, flexi fund and the optional CSS, the states are empowered to decide how to use funds. So this is how the change, the shift during the Niti Aayog era. And of course the bottom up, because now states are equal partners. Now there is concept of Team India. Okay, Team India, and states are equal partners, and they are now taking participation in the various aspects. And for example, this restructuring of CSS itself, okay, the states were having direct involvement in that process. So bottom up approach is also there. Now let us see 2 main mandates. What are the 2 main mandates of Niti Aayog? So 2 main mandates, one is the cooperative federalism and the other is the competitive federalism. So cooperative federalism, in this case, what the Niti Aayog is doing? Niti Aayog is providing a platform for direct issue based interaction. So states and the center are coming together to discuss various issues directly. Okay, then we can see that after coming of this Niti Aayog, there is states and center, they are acting as the equal partners. They are now Team India. They are acting as equal partners. But during planning commission, they were not equal partner as such, although there was concept of NDC, but that was not the case of equal partners. And 2 examples we can see. One is the restructuring of centrally sponsored schemes. So the center and the states, they are together now, they have together decided that the centrally sponsored schemes should be rationalized, there should be core, there should be optional, flexi fund concept, all these things we have discussed. So restructuring of centrally sponsored schemes is there. Then we can see that Niti Forum is there for Northeast states. So the states, Northeast states, okay, the center, they are coming together at the Niti Forum, okay, and they are bringing various proposals. They are being implemented by the states in the partnership with Northeast Council, okay, Northeast Council. So this is how, meaning that Niti Aayog is in fact providing some platform, okay, where the states, various states and the centers, they come together and act as equal partners, okay, as Team India, the concept of Team India. So this is how Niti Aayog is promoting cooperative federalism. Now in case of competitive federalism, what Niti Aayog is doing? Niti Aayog is publishing various sector indices, for example, for health sector, for education sector, okay, for other sectors also, and that in this index is being put in the public domain. So it is trying to induce some healthy competition, okay, healthy competition. For example, performance in health outcome index is there, composite water index is there, then school education quality index, it is also getting published by the Niti Aayog. So in fact, by publishing various indices and ranking of the states, the Niti Aayog is promoting competition among the states, that is the healthy competition. So this is how 2 important mandates that is being played by the Niti Aayog. Then we have some important contributions by Niti Aayog. Let us see one by one. One is aspirational district program. So we know that some districts are backward and the government is trying to raise the human development indicators of those backward districts to the national average. Okay, so this is how the aspirational district program is there. Now what Niti Aayog is doing in this case, Niti Aayog is monitoring on real time basis the improvement in the indicators of, say, health, nutrition, education. So all these sectors are there, and for these sectors there are various indicators, and these indicators, whether they are improving or not, this is getting monitored by the Niti Aayog on real time basis. So this is how Niti Aayog is performing a very important role in case of aspirational district programs, and there is also ranking of the aspirational districts. Okay, then we have policy related inputs. Niti Aayog is putting various efforts, various in fact policy related inputs. These are being done by the Niti Aayog. We can see some examples. In case of universal health, the design of this Ayushman Bharat and the monitoring of Ayushman Bharat, there Niti Aayog has its own role to play. Then we have campaign against child malnutrition, there Poshan Abhiyan, there also a key role was played by the Niti Aayog. Then we have electric mobility. In this case, one research paper, India's electric mobility transformation. This research paper has been published by Niti Aayog. Okay, in case of electric mobility for India. Then in case of agricultural sector, there is roadmap for Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sinchai Yojana. Then there is a strategy for New India at the rate 75. In this case, various stakeholders, states, departments, various civil society organizations, industry, and various stakeholders have been consulted by the Niti Aayog. And then we have this whole of the government approach. Okay, so this paper is also very important, where Niti Aayog has given various potential challenges, way forward for various sectors. For example, for industry sector, for agricultural sector. So what is the potential, what is the challenge, what may be the way forward. So this is also very good research paper by the Niti Aayog. So this is how policy related input is being given by Niti Aayog. Then in case of drafting of bills also, Niti Aayog is playing a very good role. And two very visible example is National Medical Commission Bill. In this case, Niti Aayog drafted this bill. Then we have Model Land Leasing Act. In this case also, Niti Aayog drafted the bill, Model Land Leasing Bill. Then we can see that outcome monitoring framework. So monitoring is also one very important role that is being played by Niti Aayog, and that is being done by DMEO. DMEO, that is this Development Monitoring and Evaluating Office, an independent office within Niti Aayog. So this is also a very important aspect, monitoring framework. Okay, for example, this outcome and output monitoring framework. For example, 125 centrally sponsored schemes was evaluated by DMEO, that whether it will be continued from 14th Finance Commission to the 15th Finance Commission or not. Similarly, they are helping various they are helping Department of Expenditure in preparing outcome budget for various ministries and departments. And of course, they are also collaborating with the states, that states develop similar capacity to monitor, okay, monitor the output and outcome. So this is how another role by the Niti Aayog. And then one important role being played by Niti Aayog is the innovation system, innovation ecosystem. And Atal Innovation Mission, that is one flagship program that is being implemented by this Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog is aiming to create innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. Okay, now how this ecosystem is getting created? For example, Atal Tinkering Labs. These are getting set up in schools, so that the school students, they get some innovative ideas, innovative mindset is getting inculcated into the minds of these students. Okay, so Atal Tinkering Lab is there. Now if some good idea, innovation is coming, then that innovation is incubated in the Atal incubation centers, and then it is given shape through the startups. Okay, So this is how nurturing ecosystem of this innovation and entrepreneurship, that is also some dimension where Niti Aayog is playing a very good role. So this is how the various important contributions by Niti Aayog we have discussed. So this is very important, because any time a question can be framed on this, because already 5 or 6 years have been there after coming of the Niti Aayog. So we should be very careful about this. Now let us see topic 2. This topic 2 is one nation, one election. See, this topic has various dimensions, but we will be discussing through the prism of this article of Yojana only. Okay. Now let us see from 1951-52, when the first election was conducted, from then to 1967, almost there was near simultaneous election, because Lok Sabha elections and legislative elections were getting conducted simultaneously, except some aberrations. For example, during 1960, Kerala midterm election was there. After 1967, this simultaneous election got broken. Okay, and various causes can be there. For example, in 1971, Lok Sabha was dissolved prematurely. Then in 1975, Lok Sabha term was extended to 6 years, but Legislative Assembly, they were having 5 years. So then we can see that during 98-99, 2 Lok Sabha they faced premature. This is not distribution, this is dissolution. Okay, so this is how. So this disrupted the one nation, one election cycle. Now there is in fact much focus on one nation, one election. This is one very hot topic for discussion these days. Now let us see what the author is arguing in this article. First is that synchronizing terms of houses, that is important, because Lok Sabha and Legislative Assembly, they have 5-year tenure. Less than 5-year tenure if they can be dissolved earlier, more than 5-year tenure if there is proclamation of emergency, but 5-year tenure is there. Now see, if we are going to synchronize the terms of houses so that there is one nation, one election, so some immediate need is there, and then afterward need is also there. What is the immediate need? We have to bring down the tenure of legislative assemblies and Lok Sabha together at this point. Now those legislative assemblies which are to be in fact their term either has to be increased by 2-3 years, or they have to be decreased by 2-3 years, so that all of their terms could end at a given middle point. Okay. So this is important. Either some legislative assemblies, their tenure will have to increase by 2 to 3 years, or their term will have to be decreased by 2 to 3 years if election is to be conducted today. Okay. So this is how synchronizing terms of Lok Sabha and Legislative Assembly requires that the constitutional amendment is there which curtail or extend the terms of these houses by 2 to 3 years, so that they their tenure end at the same point. Okay, but we know that there is 5-year tenure, therefore extension or curtailment of the tenure requires constitutional amendment. So this is the immediate need. Now afterwards, after this simultaneous election has been done, we have to avoid the midterm. We have to avoid the midterm elections. This is very important. We have to avoid the midterm elections. Now what can be done for this? Because if midterm dissolution is there, then again the one nation, one cycle, one nation, one election cycle will get broken. So we have to protect the simultaneous election cycle by avoiding this midterm dissolution. So one example can be that no confidence motion, if it is brought, then it has to be brought along with a constructive vote of confidence in an alternative government. If no confidence, if there is no constructive vote of confidence that is getting passed, that means no confidence motion will also not get passed. That means the government will not fall and it will complete its tenure of 5 years. So when it will complete its tenure of 5 years, it means it will avoid the midterm dissolution and the simultaneous election cycle will continue as such. Now see, why simultaneous elections? So there are many arguments for this, but we will be focusing on what this author is saying. It is saying that in favor of this simultaneous election, that it will reduce labor, time, expenditure in conduct of election. And second, that instances of pause in governance, it is being said in the context of model code of conduct, it will get addressed. So instances of pause in governance will get addressed. So these two things are there in favor of simultaneous election. Now let us see the expenditure issue. The expenditure issue that is being argued here in favor of simultaneous election. So the author is saying that in case of this expenditure issue, there can be savings done, at the same time there can be savings offset also. How savings done and savings offset? Savings done, let us see. So all logistics are same, because if both the elections are getting done simultaneously, then there will be savings in terms of human resources. For example, deployment of CAPF, the deployment, the mobilization, all these things of CAPF, that will save money. Similarly, there will be saving on polling team also, same team will be going, same team will be getting transported, accommodated. So various and also they will be trained, remuneration given to them. So there are various aspects on which the savings will be there. Okay. Also savings will be there in electioneering, because public rallies are getting done by various top leaders and their security. It requires huge expenses also. Okay. So savings in that case also will be there. But author is saying that these savings will get offset. Why? Because if all the elections are held together, then EVM will have to be doubled, because earlier when elections were getting done separately, then same EVMs could be utilized, once for LAs, then again for LA Legislative Assembly. But now since all are being done simultaneously, it means EVMs cannot be reutilized, so we have to double the number of EVMs. Secondly, each polling station needs 2 EVM sets. Secondly, the thing is that in procurement of EVM, initial cost will be there, because we have to double the EVM. Then after this initial cost, there will be problem, in fact expenditure in storage and security also. So this is how savings will get offset. So this is how, what the author is arguing here. Now let us see the model code of conduct, the impact on governance. So what is model code of conduct? So it is a set of behavioral guidelines for candidates and political parties, particularly the party which is in power, for the purpose of ensuring level playing field. So level playing field should be there, and for this there should be some check on the behavior of the candidates and the political parties. That's why there is model code of conduct. Okay. So for example, this model code of conduct, this prohibits the ruling party that they cannot use the official resources for electoral activities, and also they cannot announce new schemes, etc., to influence the voters. So this is how model code of conduct is some sort of restriction on the candidates and political parties. We all know all these things. Now see what the counter arguments being put by the author. Author is saying that, see, even if there is MCC, then schemes, programs and work which are already in progress, they are not going to be affected. Of course, new schemes cannot be announced, but all those which are already in progress, they cannot get affected. Secondly, in case of Lok Sabha, of course, the MCC applies to all the union and the states. But in case of Legislative Assembly, it allows, it applies to only the poll-bound states. Okay. So if there is election in one state, then other 28 states, other 27 states, they will not be having model code of conduct in force. Similarly, in case of by-election, restriction is only to district where the election is being done. Okay. So this is how the author is arguing against MCC, model code of conduct, being impediment on governance. Okay. So these things should be kept in mind. Now see one very important dimension, that is local bodies and one nation, one election. So here the author is saying that local bodies cannot be considered for one nation, one election scheme. In that one nation, one election scheme, the third tier, the local bodies cannot be a fit. It will be a misfit. Why? Because legislative assembly election and Lok Sabha elections are conducted by Election Commission of India, but local bodies elections are conducted by State Election Commission. So there are two institutions, there are two different authorities, and if elections are being done simultaneously, then the same polling officials, they will have to report and to take instructions from two different authorities simultaneously. It means that conflicts may occur. So this is one very important aspect. Then secondly, for local bodies elections, the polling stations are different, because for local bodies elections, one MP or one MLA is not getting elected. Rather, there are various functionaries. For example, village pradhan is there, ward member is there. So various posts are to be elected for. Okay. So for local bodies elections, different sets of polling stations are there. Then the third aspect is that in case of local bodies, if any disputes arise, then it gets challenged in the court of the district judge and lower court. But in case of Lok Sabha and legislative assembly elections, it can be challenged in high court only. So there can be one situation when the same issue, because all the elections are getting done simultaneously, so the same issue, one issue if arises, it will be getting challenged into two different courts, one in the high court and other in the district court. So again there will be problem. So this is how the authorities are going. Then one important note is that there are frequent elections which can, if there are frequent elections, that can bring election fatigue. So it is one argument in favor of simultaneous election, that if frequent elections are being done, then election fatigue will be there. It means that there will be apathy in voting. People would not like go for voting. Okay, they will feel fatigue. But if there is simultaneous election, then this fatigue will not be felt, and then there will be better voter participation. And when there is better voter participation, it means there will be more credibility to the elections. This is how it is. Now let us see the topic 3. This topic 3 is fiscal federalism in COVID-19 times. In fact, during COVID-19 times, what happened, that the states, their fiscal condition, their financial condition deteriorated. Now how the centers are taking measures to improve the financial status of states and to make resources available to the states. So some steps have been taken and we are compiling them. Okay, in this topic, these steps have been compiled. First is the enhancement of borrowing limit of states. So borrowing is very important for states to plug their fiscal deficit, and that borrowing limit has been raised by 2% of GSDP for 2021. So this is one area that states can now borrow more. They can borrow more. But one rider is there. Some part of this borrowing limit, they have been linked to the reforms, like in power sector, ease of doing business, then in urban local bodies, urban development. So some sectors are there, and reforms in those sectors will determine the borrowing. Okay, some part of the borrowing, out of this 2%, some percent of this borrowing is linked to the reforms in various sectors. So this is how. Then we have wage and means advances. Let us see what are wage and means advances. So RBI provides wage and means advances. Why? For temporary, if there is temporary mismatch in cash flow. Okay, so to bridge that temporary mismatch, wage and means advances can be there. And this wage and means advances for the states, that has a limit, and that limit fixed for the states is based on the expenditure of that total expenditure of that state, revenue deficit, the fiscal position of that state, and that WMA, wage and means advances, that is borrowed by the states, has a interest rate. That interest rate is the repo rate. Okay, and after that WMA limit, if beyond that states are borrowing from the RBI, then that is the overdraft facility. But in that case, the interest rate will also go up. So this is how basics. Now see what the center has done. Center has requested RBI that increase this WMA limit by 60%. Now it means that a state will have more liquidity for borrowing. Secondly, for overdraft, this overdraft that is taken by the state has to be for some period only. So the time period for which the states can be in overdraft, that time period has been extended. Okay, so again one some space for the states. Now what will happen? These two steps, one is the increase in the limit, WMA limit, another is the increase in the period for which the states can be in overdraft. These will ensure that there is liquidity for the states for short term borrowing, and that too at lower interest rate. So this is how wage and means advances. Then third aspect is that this COVID-19 has been declared as a notified disaster, and when it has been a notified disaster, that means SDRF fund can be utilized for COVID-19, and that too its limit has been increased from 25% to 50%. So 50% of the fund from SDRF can be used for COVID-19. Now see, this SDRF has been constituted under this act, NDMA Act, and in this SDRF 75% contribution is by states. Yes, of course, 90% contribution by 75% is contribution by union, and 90% contribution by union is in case of Northeast and Himalayan states. Okay. Now the fourth thing that the center has done, financial assistance to states has been given. Okay. For example, in October 2020, scheme of financial assistance to states for capital expenditure was there. 12,000 crore for the scheme has been disbursed. Then we have a special window for borrowing. This is very controversial topic and has been in news very much. So much debate was there on this issue. In fact, after the GST regime, there was one GST compensation fund that was created. It was to compensate for the revenue deficit. If revenue deficit was there for the states, then that was to be compensated for 5 years after the GST regime was there, and that compensation was to be from GST compensation fund. Now after this economic crisis, because of this COVID-19 situation, there is decrease in GST compensation fund. So center has said that it will borrow the amount on states behalf, and once there is accruals in the compensation fund in future, in times to come, when there will be rebound in the economy, then the compensation fund accruals will be there, and from that accruals the loan borrowing will be repaid. So this is how a special window for borrowing. Then we have maintaining tax devolution to the states also. This step also, see, 15th Finance Commission said that 41% tax devolution will be there for the states, and during first quarter of 2021, although there was decline in the gross revenue, but even then center devolved taxes to states based on the budget estimates only for 2020 and 21. So on the basis of that budget estimate, center devolved it, even if there was a decline in the gross revenue, but it did not curtailed or reduced the devolution to the states. So this is how after last quarter, during the last quarter, there was increase in revenue, and the center devolved some additional fund also. So in fact, these are the various 6 steps, 6 measures in fact that has been taken by the center to augment the financial position of the states. So we have compiled this. Okay. Now let us see topic number 4, challenges of skill development. This is also very important topic. The context of this topic is that the district skill committee which is there for skill management at district level, okay, and they need to be empowered. The capacity building of this district skill committee has to be done. Okay. Now see, what is the composition of this district skill committee? So all significant district program district department officers, they are part of this district skill committee. Of course, members of civil society industry can also be there. What are the functions of this district skill committee? Planning for skill training based on demand and supply. For example, if it is a tourist place, the district is a tourist place, then it has its own demand and supply. So based on that demand and supply, skill training has to be planned. For example, if it's a tourist place, in fact, then tour guides. Okay, tour guides. This can be one a way of skilling. This can be one area where people can be given skill training. So based on the demand supply, skill training has to be there. Socio-economic profile, what is the literacy rate of the people, what is the caste composition, what is the traditional occupation of the people. So this is how socio-economic profile, availability of skill infrastructure, how skill can be imparted at the district, whether there are institutions or not, how it can be planned. So based on these aspects, demand, supply, socio-economic profile and availability of skill infrastructure at district level, planning has to be done by district skill committee for skill management at the district level. Then secondly, it has to promote the activities like counseling. For example, there may be many people who can be counseled as to what they should do, which courses they should go for, how they can get job. Various counseling can be done, and of course monitoring and evaluation has to be done, and these are required for course correction. If evaluation is there, monitoring is there, then if need be, course correction can be there also. What should be the capacity building architecture? So the first thing is creating and managing knowledge, then customizing and localizing content, and then disseminating that knowledge through training. So these are three important aspects, and then of course evaluation has to be done, feedback should be there, these things. But let us understand these three things: creating and managing knowledge. So let us see one district, this is district X. Now this district X has bamboo, okay, so much it is bamboo rich district. So one thing is that we have to create knowledge, that what are the strengths of the district, okay, and now this district is bamboo rich, so there can be skilling for skill imparts that can be imparted for bamboo crafts for this skill can be imparted. So first is thing, we have to create the knowledge, manage the knowledge, that what is the strength of the district, what is the weakness of the district. So strength can be that it is bamboo rich, but weakness can be that there is no marketing facility, okay. So we have to create knowledge about all these things. Then we have to localize the content. For example, if bamboo rich is there, so we will be focusing on imparting skills in bamboo crafts, okay. So this is how localizing the content, and then this knowledge has to be disseminated through training to the officers of this district skill committee. These officers of the district skill committee, they should also be trained about what is the strength of the district, what is the weakness of the district, and what is the local content about skill development planning, all these things. So this is how capacity building architecture is. Hope you understood all these things. Now let us see what is being done and what can be done. So what is being done and what can be done. So what is being done? So Sankalp, it is one flagship program relating to skill of Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. So this Sankalp has prepared a DSC toolkit, that there will be 4 components, okay. First component will be indicator. So there will be various indicator to judge the progress, okay, to judge the progress. Indicators can be there. Then templates, that means what is the situation that is prevailing. Then there can be resource library that will document the various processes and various best practices which can be emulated. Then dashboard is there, dashboard on which the district level statistics and analysis is there. So all these 4 will help in skill planning, okay, skill management at a district level. Then the second thing, we have to institutionalize the process of knowledge creation and dissemination. So knowledge creation and dissemination of that knowledge, that has to be institutionalized. How it can be done? Institutions, there are many institutions which are interested in public policy research. They are having expertise in local planning. So they can aid in skill management. They can create knowledge, and they will in fact do the public policy research, they will do the research, and they will create knowledge, okay. Now that knowledge these institutions will create, and they will disseminate this knowledge created will be disseminated by institutions. For example, the various administrative training institutes are there. So these administrative training institutes, now they can impart this knowledge created by some expert public policy related expert institutions. So those knowledge can be imparted, okay, through training to the officers. This is how the process is. So let me explain it once more. What is being said is that institutionalization of the process of knowledge creation and dissemination. So the first thing is that there are many institutions which can, for example, IIMs, okay, they can have public policy research, they can create knowledge, okay. Now knowledge has been created, but this knowledge has to be given to the officers also. Training has to be given, okay. So this created knowledge, they can be disseminated to the officers. Training can be given by institutions like administrative training institutions. So this is how knowledge is getting created and then disseminated. Now over time what will happen? The DSC, District Skill Committee, will itself get empowered, okay, and now they will themselves produce credible data and skill management at the district level. So this is how institutionalization of the process of knowledge creation and its dissemination. Training of the DSC members, as we have discussed above. So how this training of the DSC members can be done? So they can be incentivized by say next posting of choice, deputation in departments of their choice. So in fact training, of course, many members, officers of DSC, they may not be so much interested in getting trained, but these things, these incentives, deputation and choice posting, they can promote them that they should go for the training, okay. So this is very important aspect. See, one important aspect is that capacity building, okay, of this district skill committee to aid decentralization. It cannot be top down from the MSD, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. They cannot be prescriptive. That means the ministry cannot prescribe that do this, don't do this. In fact, inputs from the districts have also been taken, and the inputs from the districts, they will help in designing the syllabus, the medium. Now people cannot be trained in English medium. If it is a tribal region largely, then what should be the methodology, what should be the pedagogy, syllabus, all these things, this should be shaped as per the inputs from the districts, okay, rather than being directly prescriptive from the Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. That's why there is, now we can see there is bottom up approach, emphasis on bottom up approach. Now let us see what should be the content of capacity building. So two examples we can see, and these two examples are very important. Let us take one example. This example is how to make scavenging, rag picking, waste disposal as aspirational, monetarily rewarding and entrepreneurial. This is very important because these things, scavenging, rag picking, these are related to some specific caste in our society. In fact, many skill in India is traditionally caste specific. Some specific caste is doing these things. And since these skills are non-remunerative, that's why they are being done by poorer section, castes who are at the lower strata, okay, these things. And one example is this scavenging, rag picking. So these things are getting done by those who are lowest people in our society. Now how to make it monetarily rewarding and entrepreneurial? So in this case, go for mechanization and impart skills, how to run those machines. So once machines are getting used, are going to be used, mechanization is there for doing all these things, then there will be some good aspects, some good outcome will be there. What will be good outcome? First thing is that career pathways will attract people from other castes. Now other caste people will also see that, okay, because of mechanization and this new way of doing all these things, other castes may also be coming. And when other castes may be coming, then the existing castes who are doing these things, their profile will also increase, okay. Then of course different types of jobs job roles will also be created, different types of supervisory levels, such as different types of job structure may be created. So this will be benefit. Now equitable and just society will be there, because caste related aspect will get diluted with these things, scavenging and waste disposal. So skill development can be helpful in social justice and economic growth also. So this should be kept in mind. Now second example, tourism sector. Let us take tourism sector. In this case, tourism sector, what is being said is that there should be backward and forward linkage of district skill plans. District alone, on the basis of a single district, we cannot create tourism sector. Skill training in tourism sector, it cannot be done for a single district. Rather, it should be integrated with the state level and the national level planning. For example, there is Swadesh Darshan scheme and various other schemes of Ministry of Tourism. Okay. For example, there is Ramayana circuit, there is Buddhism circuit. So various districts are there on this circuit. So one district alone cannot be taken as the basis for skill training in tourism. Rather, tourism is something which has to be integrated with the state level and national level planning. So I hope you understood this point. So in this case also, the skill training has to see for the forward linkage and backward linkage. It cannot be district specific only. Okay. Now let us see, DSC needs to have thorough understanding of socio-economic profile of district population, skills, history of local committees, their changing and emerging aspirations, attitudes. These things you can understand on your own. Now let us see challenges in federalism and way forward. So this is also one important topic. Indian federal system, political system is federal in nature. This is how we know. But even that federalism is centralized federalism, quasi federal. This is how Indian federalism is quasi federalism. It is not an ideal federalism, rather it is a centralized federalism that has got tilted in favor of the center. And of course this is required because India's survival and political stability is required, because there is too much diversity on the basis of religion, language, caste, ethnicity, all these things. Therefore, the thing is that a stronger union is required, and that's why the federalism is biased towards the center. Anyways, given this introduction, now let us see some important aspects. Federal governance during COVID-19. Now during COVID-19 initial stage, what happened? There was unitary tilt in the federal structure because lockdown was getting implemented by the union. Ministry of Home Affairs, it was issuing the extensive guidelines to the states. So in fact we were acting as something unitary state, okay, largely tilted towards the union. Then afterwards, now we can see that center is now giving a space to the states. For example, lockdown. Now in this second wave, during the second wave of COVID-19, lockdown is getting localized. It is to be decided upon by the states. Lockdown is not getting imposed by the center. Okay. States, then again, during this COVID-19 itself, federalism, other aspect of federalism, that states are breaching their fiscal deficit limits because their financial situation is getting deteriorated. That's why their financial dependence on center is increasing. Now center financial dependence on center is increasing, and we have discussed in one of the above topics that there are wage and means advances, then we have borrowing limit going up. All these things we discussed above, some measures taken by the center to augment the financial resources of the states. So center, the financial dependence of a state is increasing on the center. Now what center is doing? Center is leveraging this to push some reforms. So above we discussed that the borrowing limit has been increased by 2% of GSDP for 2020 or 21. But there are some riders also. We discussed how some riders were there. That the reforms, the borrowing is linked to reforms in power sector, reforms in urban development. So some part of borrowing although increase in borrowing limit for states is there, but some part of this borrowing is linked to the reforms also. Okay, so this is one aspect. Then other is that agricultural marketing reforms, or the 3 farm bills. This is how it was in news recently. So these two examples, we can see that the center is using its own power to push much needed reforms. So this is another dimension of federalism during the COVID-19. So we have, in fact, we are discussing about the federal governance during COVID-19. So initially it was unitary tilt when lockdown was implemented by the union. Afterwards, lockdown was not getting implemented by union, rather states were getting the autonomy. But states' financial condition deteriorated. In that case, center leveraging its financial dependence of the states to push for reforms. This increase in borrowing limit is there, but reforms are linked there. Then agricultural marketing reforms are there. So this is how. In fact, here after this analysis, one important note is there, that when ruling party is dominant political party, such reforms are there. States' powers seem to increase relative to center in the absence of single party. When there is no single party, that means when there is coalition party, coalition government, then states are dominant. But when the single party, okay, for example, today there is single party rule in the center. In that case, the union dominance increases. Okay, and that's why one very good statement is there, that the federal relation in India is a function of political forces more than the structural constraint. Structural constraints as per the constitutional scheme, division of power, separation of power, all these things. But this political force is more determining factor, because when there is coalition government, then states are more powerful. When there is single party governance, then the states are less powerful. So this is how one dimension of federalism. Then drafting a law. This is another dimension where federalism has its own significance. See how center has to consult the states. That's why the cooperative federalism, the concept of cooperative federalism. Now draft legislations are put on the website. Okay, so online sharing is there, then stakeholders consultation is there. For example, center is drafting one model tenancy act, and it is seeking the state's opinion. But what happens? We are in fact discussing the challenges in the federalization. What is the challenge in the federalization? That consensus may not be reached. Why consensus may be not reached? Because of diversity. Each state has its own issue. Maybe each state, a given state or a given set of states, they are having their own issues. And because of this differences in the issues, because of diversity, the states may not reach consensus. So this is one difficult aspect, challenge for the federalism. One example is West Bengal. It has its own legislation, HERA, in case of real estate. But other states, they are having rules under RERA as enacted by the center. But West Bengal is having its own legislation. So this is how one challenge in the federal relation. Now, after advent of market economy, what has happened? Centers now they are encouraging states that you go for negotiating loans, you go for the FDI. You may reach the overseas banks and institutions directly. So this is how after 1990s the states are getting empowered. They are not getting dependent on centers grant in aid. Rather, they can now go to the overseas banks or institutions for loans. They can attract FDI. So this is how states are getting more empowered. Then comes the para-diplomacy by states. Why? Because the foreign policy, earlier it was a central reserve. The central government was to decide. But now after economic liberalization, LPG era and market-based economy, now states are themselves interacting with the foreign investors, and they are interacting with the foreign investors, and this is reducing the financial dependence on center. okay, and they are also aiding the economic development. So this is another change in the federal relation, okay. In the federal relation, another change is there. It has its own issues. But before that, let us see this example. Gujarat is setting up its international desk independently in US, China, Japan, so that it can facilitate the invest in vibrant Gujarat. So this is one example where Gujarat is itself trying to facilitate investment in Gujarat. But the issues are there. What are the issues? There may be bearing on sovereignty. So the concept of sovereignty is getting diluted somehow, because the states are themselves having playing a role in foreign policy somehow. And it is also a problematic for the security regions, because India is a country which is surrounded by many hostile nations. Okay. Now the role of center increases. In fact, in granting license, now center has to examine from many angles. It cannot see only through the prism of economic aspect. Rather, it has to see through many angles. For example, if some exports are coming from China, now center cannot see only through economic aspects. Rather, it has to see through the prism of security also. Now, what happens when the center is examining the proposal from various angles? So there is going to be delay, and the states are not liking this delay. They say that the center's intervention is not good. Okay. So these are issues, some problematic areas in the this federal relations. Okay, this article has this tone. Now see, what is the way forward? So way forward is the author is saying that India is a diverse and large country, and therefore it has to balance the 6 pillars of federation. One is the autonomy of the states on one side, autonomy of the states, on the other side national integration. So if states are given too much autonomy, then the national integration will get jeopardized. So a balance is to be there. Too much centralization and decentralization both may be harmful. Similarly, too much nationalization and too much regionalization may be harmful. So a balance is required. So this is how the author has argued for in this topic. Now let us see the last topic, that is the topic 6, progress in human development since independence. Okay, and it is also very important topic. See, in fact, human development has been defined as an expansion of human capabilities, widening of choices, enhancements of freedom, fulfillment of human rights. So when a person is given voice, choice and rights, all these things are given to some person, then he is having some human development. Okay, so this definition is very good, that human capabilities should be expanded, choices should be widened, enhancement of freedom, fulfillment of rights, these things are there, then we say that human development is there. Now see, earlier there was quantitative approach. That means the development was judged as per the gross national product, GDP or gross domestic product or gross national product. So there was quantitative approach in judging the development. That's why there is concept of economic growth and concept of economic development. So these two terms are different, economic growth and economic development. Economic growth is quantitative, economic development is qualitative. So economic growth, that was judged by the GDP, GNP, it was quantitative approach, but now qualitative approach is being focused, and that's why the concept of human development index has emerged. And this human development index, it is in fact a qualitative, it is written wrong, it is not quantitative, it is qualitative. It is promoting qualitative approach. Why? Because it is now seeing development, it is now judging the development based on 3 dimensions, and these 3 dimensions are longevity, life expectancy, educational attainment, then command over resources needed for a decent living. So this is how 3 dimensions are there, based on which the human development index is getting created, and it is in fact expansion of the earlier quantitative approach, that is judging the development on the basis of only GNP or GDP, whatever. Now see, let us try to understand some methodology about the HDI, how HDI is prepared. So 3 indices are there for HDI. These 3 indices are there, and each index has its own formula. Life expectancy index is there. So life expectancy in that country, this is minus 20. 20 is the minimum, 85 is the maximum value for the life expectancy years, 20 years, 85 years. So this is the formula for life expectancy index. Then we have education index. So MYS means mean year of schooling, and EYS means expected year of schooling. So these two aspects. So maximum mean year of schooling is 15, and maximum expected year of schooling is 18. And these things are this MYSI is the MYS by 15, and this EYSI is EYS by 18. EYS in that country by 18, something like this. And then the arithmetic mean of these two is taken, that is the education index. Then we have income index. This is log to the base E. This is log gross national income per capita minus log 100 log 75,000. This 75,000 is in fact dollar 75,000 per capita, purchasing power parity on the basis of 2011. So this is how the formula is for the income index. Now all these 3 indices when prepared, then HDI is calculated as the geometric mean. Okay, geometric mean of all this, geometric mean to the power 1 by 3. Life expectancy index into education index into income index to the power 1 by 3. So geometric mean is there. In fact, methodology was changed in 2010. Before 2010, HDI was in fact arithmetic mean. It was the arithmetic mean of all this, but now it has been changed to geometric mean. Secondly, in 2014 also HDR induced goalpost. Goalpost means minimum and maximum value. For example, this is the minimum value, maximum value. This is the minimum value, this is the maximum value. So this has been introduced in 2014. Life expectancy minimum 20 years, maximum 85 years. Similarly, education 0 years for both mean year and expected year of schooling, and 15 is the maximum for mean year schooling, 18 maximum years for expected year of schooling. Then gross national income minimum $100, maximum $75,000. This is how. Now see, HDI also has its own problems. It does not reflect deprivation or distributional aspects of development. So it is somehow it is not dealing with the distributional aspect, rather and also it is not reflecting the deprivation. It is only telling that this is the index, this is the score, this is how it is. But whether that score has been equitably distributed to all people, no, it is not there. So HDI has this limitation. That's why other concept like gender development index has been created. This gender GDI is similar to HDI based on that 3 dimensions only, but this calculates the achievements for female. Thus we can see that now this problem with the HDI, that it is cumulative, it does not speak about the distributional aspect for dealing with these things, gender development index. So GDI is there, so it speaks about the achievement of women. So distributional aspect is there. Similarly, human poverty index has been created, a composite measure for multidimensional poverty, meaning that what is being argued here is that HDI has the limitation that it does not speak about the distribution of the development or the deprivation of the development, and that's why other indices has been created. For example, GDI. So this GDI, it is calculating the same 3 dimensions and variables as the HDI, but it is for women, it is for female. So it is taking into consideration the distribution of development to female. Okay, so this is what being our goal. Now see India's ranking in HDR. So in HDI 2020, India's ranking was 131 out of 189. But the 1991 score was this much, 0.428. In 2020, this was 0.645. It means the score has increased. If score has increased, it means India is improving. Rank may not be improving that much, but score is improving. So something good. So from 1990 to 2019, life expectancy increased by over 12 years. So life expectancy has gone up by 20 years. Similarly, mean year of schooling went up by 3.5 years. Expected year of schooling increased by 4.5 years. GNP also increased by this much amount nearly. So India is improving. So this is very important. This should be kept in mind, because many times we are facing shortage of content. We don't have content to write. Okay, so India has improved better, has improved on the front of HDI. We have to justify this, then we don't have the data. So this data will do. Now see, for human development, Millennium Development Goal was there, 8 goals was there, UN Millennium Declaration that was to be achieved by 2015. Various goals were there, and corresponding to those goals, schemes are there. Okay, although many schemes have been implemented after 2015 that we will be discussing here, but we will try to see how the goals and the schemes are there. So first goal is to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. Then we have National Food Security Act. Then we have National Rural Livelihood Mission. ICDS is there for tackling hunger. Then we have Universal Primary Education, Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, Midday Meal, ICDS. Gender equality and empowerment of women. So Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan is there. Beti Bachao Beti Padhao Andolan, scheme is there. Similarly, reduce child mortality, then National Health Mission is there, ICDS is there. Okay, improve maternal health, so there also National Health Mission, Pradhan Mantri Surakshit Matritva Yojana. Similarly, combat these diseases, so there are some schemes. So this is how we can see there are various goals of MDG, Millennium Development Goals, okay, and the various schemes. So this framework should be kept in mind. It may be helpful many a times. Then we have Sustainable Development Goals that came in 2015 and to be achieved by 2030. Okay, it has 17 goals, and we have cut short in a few words only. So this should be crammed. In fact, it may be helpful. Goal 1 is no poverty. However, the goal is not only about no poverty. It is explained in 1 or 2 lines, a bit explanatory, but to keep it simple, these things can be kept in mind. Then we have one more aspect, Bare Necessities Index. In fact, Bare Necessities Index has been developed by Economic Survey of this year, 2020, year 2020-21. This has been created by the Economic Survey. It has been developed for rural, urban and all India, at all these 3 levels has been created. Now it is based on data from the 2 NSO. That data was on drinking water, sanitation, hygiene, housing condition, all these things. And the Economic Survey is saying that there is improved access to bare necessities in 2018 when compared to 2012. Since this can be anytime a question for prelims, we have put this aspect also in this. So this is how we come to an end of our discussion. Hopefully you people enjoyed this. We are expecting your feedback also.